Chen. So this is actually the first time ever I've won an hour round. I was 0-11 before this point, but Anthony Wang was able to carry me towards my first 2 hour round victories. And I think we both spoke pretty well. I got my first speaker award, so I think this tournament was a pretty fun one. Also, this is the first time my dad has ever watched me debate.
Aww.
Time to start my first one. Kim pronouns for both you. The times of 1942 are a time of war. The Second World War is occurring presently. There's a time of recession and a time where bombs are being developed. There's only one instance where Dr. Chonky is able to take care of his family while also being able to stop the development of atomic bombs, leading to maximum utility and maximum happiness for Dr. Chonky himself. Him as Dr. Chonky likely has two primary goals. The first criteria is to simply prove that Chonky is able to contribute for pragmatic ethical responsibilities. The second criteria for this round is to prove that the happiness of Chonky and his family and himself is maximized. The first criteria is a very simple metric. The first layer of analysis here is simply that the alternative candidate, Dr. T, is presented as someone who holds no ethical reservations about mass destruction. That means that you likely see things like more dangerous weapons, fewer safety precautions, and a lack of post-war considerations for disarmament of your country. It means that the comparative is that Dr. T is likely to have no moral qualms, leading to the things that Dr. Chonky is scared of doing getting worse. The second layer of analysis is Chonky's refusal on moral grounds does not prevent any harms. It merely removes his ability to actually moderate these harms. Because whether or not Chonky actually accepts these jobs, the atomic weapons project will be moving forward. The deciding factor here is not whether these weapons are built or not, but who is able to build and actually regulate them. Because whether or not Dr. Chonky accepts these jobs, the atomic weapons program will move forward, but on our side of the house, on their side of the house, Chonky will advocate influence over a highly consequential project, but on our side of the house, he is able to do more testing data before launching a bomb, he is able to highlight risks as he visualizes, he is able to push for containment protocols, and he is able to use these bombs in only ethical situations. He also limits the harms of these bombs because it's more direct control. The third layer of analysis is simply that inaction doesn't lead to him being innocent. Even when these bombs are dropped, he likely still feels guilty when these bombs kill a massive amount of people because in refusing this job, he likely led to some safety precautions being not passed, and he could have saved more lives himself. The fourth layer of analysis is during war times, these weapons are not guaranteed to be used. Because in 1942, Hitler's power receded gradually. There's an uncertainty principle here, because when we take a step back, the reason we dropped a bomb on Hiroshima and not Germany is because the war was already dying down by 1942. Hitler is losing power in both the East and West. Chonky probably doesn't think that this bomb is actually being used, so he's more willing to develop it himself. Fifth level of analysis here is that he has a platform on our side of the house. It looks like Oppenheimer after the war. He was able to get a platform to push for the negative impacts of this bomb. He is able to have a platform to fix some of these issues, to shed light on the massive destructive impacts of these bombs. What are the impacts and Chonky's benefits on this? He has an illusion of control on himself. He thinks that he's able to actually limit the destructive ability of this bomb. He limits the amount of guilt on our side of the house. He limits the amount of death. Importantly, Chonky now has he doesn't think that these weapons will actually be used. The negative impact of these bombs also decreases, his mental health increases greatly. The second argument here is on his family and his own self. Because during 1942, during the war economy, there weren't a lot of jobs for theoretical physics. His spouse's preschool teaching salary is probably modest and best, and is likely insufficient for his family. And there's also no social safety nets. There's no unemployment benefits. There's no food aid during this wartime period. It's a level of economic recession. And Chonky has people that care for him, that depend on him, and rely on him during a time of economic uncertainty. The first layer of this argument is that his wife will likely be pissed at him, because this is one of his few opportunities to actually drop, and he passes it down because he has a qualm on what will actually happen. His wife doesn't have any qualms, and his wife will probably not be happy with him. He probably wants his wife to be happy with him. The second layer of analysis here is that Chonky likely sees the economy getting worse. He knows that he must help his family. Refusing this job leads to poverty of his family, eviction of his family, deprivation of food for Chonky's family. Because he doesn't want the bomb to be dropped, he's likely a good person. he likely wishes to support his family, should take this job in a time of economic recession because of like the principle of caring for yourself rather than arbitrary things. You value your family more than anything else. Your family lives and you maximize utility. The third layer is you have no other jobs at the third of the business. If you're currently you currently don't have a job, it's unlikely to get another job. The fourth layer is you don't know that if you're actually doing these weapons. So the most proximate thing to you right now is your family themselves. You watch your children start when you no longer have money. You watch them get bullied in the 1942 school based on capitalism and based on success of the elite. The way here is incredibly simple. Alongside government, no matter what, bombs are dropped on both sides of the house, the development of these bombs will continue. On our side, he exclusively has a platform, an illusion of control to stall all these bad impacts from occurring. On our side, he was also far happier. His wife is happy with him. He's able to support his family and also their OG with him.
Before I start my speech, I want to thank all of the TDs and CAs and judges for making this tournament possible. And I want to thank my partner for carrying me through all of the rounds and all of the out-rounds and being an amazing partner and amazing case gen and generally amazing debater. I also want to thank all of my friends who may or may not be here, Joyanne and anyone else who would consider themselves my friend. Very glad that you are here. Or not here. I don't know. Okay. I think it's incredibly unclear out of OG why Chonky has the moral obligation or even the ability to make these weapons significantly less impactful or even to participate in this process with this intention anyways. Presumably, he's working or getting hired under someone like Oppenheimer who wants these atomic bombs to be created quickly and destructively. Presumably, he'll be fired if he doesn't go on with this plan, but more so, it's just unclear why this huge burden is placed upon this man and why he would himself concede to this burden. A few claims in my speech then. First, I'll talk about why this job will take a significant mental toll and take away from his ability to be a father and be a husband. And secondly, I'll talk about the perception on him by his children, by his wife, by the people around him, directly clashing with OG here. First, on why this job will take a significant mental toll then. I think first, the people around him perceive him as someone who would concede and do these things. And even if his wife doesn't care, presumably there are people in his life that do. So for example, his friends or his family, his parents that raised him with the principles that he has right now. And even more so, even more importantly, he himself perceives people who do this job to be morally bad people, and he now has to reconcile with the fact that he is this person. What this means then is he will not be able to face his children knowing that he's contributed to the mass genocide of families and children just like his. When he goes to sleep at night, he will close his eyes and think about how he contributed to this actual horrific event that will go down in history books. His name will be written beside those who contributed to the mass killings of generations and families of people. I think, moreover then, the important impact of this is not just his mental erosion, but also that he won't be able to cope well, right? Presumably, this is a pretty confidential government project. He won't be able to talk with his wife or be able to emotionally be regulated in this way. Also, it's 1942. It's not like they have therapy or anything, right? So, he'll probably resort to unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether that's self-isolation or something worse, like alcohol, that drains even more of his funds that he would get from this job, or drains away his ability to be present as emotionally as a father and as a person in this household, right? I also want to say that presumably, if he doesn't take this job, he is probably able to be fulfilled and be able to be contributed within this household. Maybe he helps his children excel in school. Maybe he does all of the cleaning and dishes. He's still able to contribute things to his household that isn't just providing money, and it's unclear why this money is going to so heavily outweigh anything his ability to actually participate in his family in a significant and meaningful way. I don't think OG proves this. This is very, very important. I also want to talk a little bit about his wife and her being mad at him and his children under this. I think that first, on children, that his children are being shaped by him and his wife, right? Their morals probably directly at some point come from the morals that he instills on them, and he himself has the incentive for his children to be moral good people who lead moral good lives and live by those like good morals, right? And so what this means then is that the children and his wife are probably not going to look back on him with resentment. They're not going to say, wow, I can't believe that you didn't take this job that could have maybe gotten me a better birthday present or more extravagant dishes at our table that isn't just like beans and lentils or whatever they ate in 1942, right? What we think that this means is that when they look back on this decision, they think, wow, I'm so glad that my husband or my father didn't take this horrible decision, that he didn't kill multiple families like the ones that we have built right now, and he didn't contribute to this horrific genocide that has happened, right? We think that when they look back and reflect on this decision, they recognize it as a morally correct one that he has made, and not the one that like puts them in poverty, right? I also want to frame here that it's not like this money is going to be this money is likely going to be significant, but we don't see out of OG why it weighs against all that it takes on him. We say very clearly on OO that this doesn't allow him to be a present father. He's not able to meaningfully connect with his children because he believes that he's doing something that is directly harming the larger of society. He believes that he himself is an immoral person who is doing something terrible, even if it is for a selfish means of sustaining his family and harming on a larger societal level. I want to make OO's claims very, very clear here that it's first unclear the marginal impact that he might be able to slow production by like a month or whatever, right? It's also unclear why everyone else on the team, he's not the one person developing this bomb, everyone else on the team, the leader of the team, the people who are incentivized to make this destructive, will just be like, wow, okay, I guess this won't be destructive anymore because our one physics engineer isn't doing that, right? And most importantly, we think that ultimately his incentives of being fulfilled and being with his family heavily outweigh any sort of financial gains that OG or government can tell you. So come stand up,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, speech. Thank you to my amazing partners who got me here. I haven't been in a grand finals in a long time, so glad to be here. Thanks to my coach, Jarez. Appreciate all of the hard carrying and coaching. Thanks to my institution for letting me be here, and yeah. Without further ado, he, him pronouns should be referred to. Verbal POIs feel free to give them. And my speech will start when it's the first time you got out of opening opposition, it's this idea that you're going to have this massive toll on your mental health. I think this is very unreasonable when you notice the fact that their mechanisms are reliant on this idea that the family and friends are inherently agreeing with the idea of his morality. The fact is you live in propaganda-filled America or Germany, it doesn't matter where, but you live in a position where where society is extremely extremist and nationalist, and we don't think that it's reasonable for them to characterize that your wife that's been declared by the Infoslide to not disagree with you, to suddenly have the empiric morals to believe and agree with you, to note that that also reflects on your children too. The society in itself extremely values the side of hero narrative. The fact that you value defending for your country in a society where everyone's getting attacked and everyone's dying. The fact is, if you just look at the basic propaganda and the news within that time period, know that a majority of the mechanisms from opposition are relying on the fact that they have modern day spec. We think that is ultimately a failure on their part too. They ultimately don't explain why necessarily we believe that this will be successful. The fact is, during this time period, you had no idea this was going to even be reasonable. Atomic technology was not even like realistic at the time because you had Bohr Rutherford's discovery of like the fact that the atom existed like 20 years ago, and at that point that's like a millisecond in historic times. Albert Einstein believed that the atomic bomb was not reasonable, and why would you disagree with Albert Einstein? Like, I feel like there's so many social narratives that said that this is unfeasible, and that's why we had so many scientists apply to it. That's why only Oppenheimer succeeded, even though there were hundreds of thousands between Heisenberg and all of Germany at watch Oppenheimer. So, look, the fact is that it's unreasonable to believe that you would inherently reach the endpoint. They need to tell us that you're going to actually actualize and actually reach a point where you will reach that mass destruction. 2, proximity. They don't tell us how you're actually going to approximate at this problem. That is to say that the more proximate problems are that which you live with. That is to say, if you're homeless, if you're not working, if you don't have family yet, let's be very careful. If you're just jobless, the narratives at the time said that you should be a man, and as much as I disagree with these premises, the narrative at the time said that you had to be a man, you had to be the breadwinner, you had to make that money, and those were narratives that are much massively impactful. If they think that their family are going to be somehow so much liberal and modern liberal, they're probably going to be conservative. They're probably going to have narratives that say you're a loser or you're a failure. You already chose to do a physics degree, so you're probably already hated by your parents and expected to do something with your life. So to the extent that they actually don't weaponize this or explain it, that they don't give you the analysis within these premises, that they fundamentally rely on the idea that you're looking at this retrospectively. Not that you don't know the atomic bomb will be dropped on anywhere. You think that the war is proceeding because whatever this time period, like Germany was already losing territory in because of the Soviet Union. They lost a lot of territory in France. The fact is, you don't think that this will be likely on either side if you're Germany or American. 2, how do we how do we impact within this debate? What does my partner give you? One, we tell you how we ultimately access this idea that like you think it's important. The fact is you think that it's unlikely and you want to have a degree of control. That is to say, they cannot prove that you're absolutely going to cause an extreme amount of harm. They can't say that you value these ideas of like morality over the fact that you like that you're going to reach the moral endpoint where you reach a harm. That is to say that you know your alternative is someone who's more capable, someone that you do not have. Two ways I'm going to weigh this. This is very simple. One, self-determinance. If you have the illusion that you have some degree of control, you're comforted. They tell you through an external viewer's perspective that objectively it might be that the idea that, oh, you're a 1 in a million. But the fact is you are 1 in 4. You are one of the very few who are going to be in that position. You probably have an extent of impact. Two, at this point in time, most of physics and science is very underdeveloped. The fact is you probably couldn't create this revolutionary technology very quickly, and ultimately the way you implement it and the way you discuss it with your coworkers have a massive extent because you're probably a male individual who has a physics degree. You probably have some degree of respect in this workplace. Two, the uncertainty of it ultimately weighs down you. The fact is if you're uncertain to what extent is the development existing, you're psychologically incentivized not to buy out of this. That is to say, if you're unsure that this technology is being halted, you're unsure that this technology is being developed, you have no way of having any form of comfort or control. Note that any of their mental health claims on the idea that, oh, you need coping mechanisms, being that you don't have therapy, are all retrospectively questionable because at that time, the narrative would still be that you go do a job. The fact is, if you genuinely value these moral principles, you would prefer to have the idea of being able to impact it, the idea to be able to influence, to access that platform, and that ultimately has much more magnitude as you as an individual. Note that they don't do any extra analysis in their first, and they're going to be reliant on their second if they do. Two, the fact is that you need to also look at this from feasibility. If they can't prove feasibility exclusively, note that they can't just say you work for Oppenheimer. There were hundreds of different regions that needed scientists like this. This was like Germany, this was like Italy. They didn't tell you this is placed set in America. Note that that wasn't clarified in most clarifications. So ultimately, you can't claim that they're going to succeed. You can't claim that you have this information, and it's ultimately unclear from opening. You needed to prove that you have this belief. Two, lastly, how do we weigh out on this idea of self-determinance and the ability to control and your proximity to your family? Your family is very more proximate. You can actually watch them suffer. They say that your kids aren't going to notice the difference between a little bit of food or a lot of food. The fact is, you're living in a time period where literally everyone was in poverty. It was right after the Great Depression. All things are being rationed. If you have any degree of extent, that meets a massive amount. Think of a third world country in the status quo, but infinitely worse. We don't have healthcare, don't have resources, don't have international aid. The fact is, you are in such a bad position that even if you claim in the long term you might see it benefits after they win the war, the fact is in the short term, you're proximate thinking. You're probably a rational individual who believes in the short term, who values that proximity, and in turn you value the utility derived from actually having some financial capacity to actually keep yourself alive. You think that is infinitely more important. They cannot win this debate by just speculating on long-term benefits that they cannot prove.
Before I start my speech, I would love to do a thank you speech. So I first want to thank the CAs and everyone who organized this tournament for making an amazing tournament. This was super fun. Also, the food was really, really good. I also want to thank my coaches because they've been really amazing and really helpful. Shout out to Hao. I love Hao. She's amazing. And then I also want to shout out my parents for driving me here. It's been really nice. And I also want to shout out a couple of names. Firstly, Joyanne for carpooling me here. I literally could not have gotten here and gotten home without you. Then I want to shout out a couple other people. So I want to shout out Kaya. I want to shout out Isolde, Leo. I want to shout out Enoch. And I also want to shout out my amazing partner, Michelle, because Michelle, she's just so good. She's so smart. She always tells me when I'm BSing. It's absolutely amazing. I love Michelle because she's actually just been such a great partner. Okay. Also, shout out to Ella. Yeah. Chonky's life is about the maximization of his fulfillment, and it is about what he wants to do in life. But the issue is here. OG doesn't prove that this is what Chonky ultimately wants to reach in life. OG doesn't prove that making weapons of mass destruction and getting temporary money for it is a worth it trade-off. Because if I murdered 10,000 people, or if I had the chance to murder 10,000 people, and if I got $1 million or $1 billion for it, it still wouldn't justify it, because I would tell myself every single day that I caused the genocide of multiple people, and that means I would never consider myself a good person. I would never be able to actualize myself with that money, no matter how happy my family felt, because I would always blame them, or I would always blame myself for those struggles. And that is the world that OG wants Chonky to live in. And we would say that Chonky cannot accept this. There's two things I'll talk about. First, on the money claim, and then second, on the emotional claim. Firstly then, on the money claim, and this is broadly about family. They say that money matters to you because because of your family and that you want to provide your family with the best life because money's the only way to do so. First of all, it's unclear why this isn't in Chonky's incentive to do so in the first place. I would say Chonky is relatively smart and optimistic, and they could probably find a good job, and they're like a physicist. There's probably other areas that you can go to. This looks like mathematics. Perhaps you can go to encryption, coding, and things like that that are still relatively useful in the war. And this is because physics is cross-applicable to subjects like math. In order to be good at physics, you also have to be incredibly good at math. So yes, there are other alternatives for Dr. Chonky to go to. The reason why Dr. Chonky doesn't have a job now is probably because he literally refused to do all the evil jobs that he was offered to in the field of physics. But there's also other alternatives, and we would say because Chonky is super talented, likely very smart, that is why the government asked him to develop an atomic bomb, which is why then Chonky himself probably realizes he has the ability to get whatever job he wanted to if he put in a lot of effort. Chonky is likely to be the most qualified candidate for certain jobs that were needed in the war, such as encryption and coding. But secondly then, the wife would probably consider Chonky a hero. And this is because the wife actually loves Chonky. The reason the wife probably married Chonky was because Chonky is good at morals. That Chonky was actually a very nice person. That she found Chonky very sweet, attractive, very smart. So given this, we would say then the wife isn't going to hate Chonky for not taking an evil job that would make himself feel like a horrible person and that would make himself be depressed every day. Because no one you love wants to see you depressed every single day. No one you love wants to see you feel like you're a bad person every day and drown in things such as alcohol because that was the only way to cope in the 1940s. Realistically, there was no such thing as therapy. Chonky doesn't know what therapy is. All people really knew in the 1940s was alcohol, man. But additionally that, money itself is probably temporary. Because even if he becomes the richest person in the world, no amount of materialistic goods can make Chonky feel better about the harm he caused to his family. So this looks like the fact that probably after the job, like, this won't exist anymore. You won't be able to develop any sort of weapon. It's unclear whether or not you'll be guaranteed stable employment. And given that no gov team actually proved this, we would say we're able to beat them on the potential of a job. But additionally then, it is not a worth it trade-off to make it so that your children probably hate you. And this is for a couple of reasons. First of all, you probably taught your children morals as Dr. Chonky, and you're very scared of them becoming less moral because this is something you likely instilled in them since they were young. So oftentimes this is going to cause you to blame yourself. You don't want to be in a cycle of self-blame where you see the literal product of you. What people see is going to be your next generation is a bad person. You don't want that to ever happen. But secondly then, you don't want your wife and kids to probably hate you because if they don't go against this or become immoral, they're probably going to detest you in some way, shape, or form as long as they hold their morals, which is probably the reason why they love you so much in the first place. So given all of this, you probably want to have a good relationship with your family and you want to live the rest of your life happy with them. No amount of money can pay for the unhappiness you feel after you kill 10,000 people or partake in the killing of 10,000 people as an accomplice. But secondly then, on the more emotional claim, their claim here is that because development exists, whether or not you take the job doesn't matter because Tairanosaur is going to take it and make it worse. First of all, you are as brilliant as Tairanosaur is. Of course OG cannot argue like uncertainty here that it might not work, it might work. Like realistically, you know you're going to reach the end impact of actually making a weapon of mass destruction. And this is because there's already existing weapons of destruction. This looks like things like tanks. There's already bombs. So you know it is definitely possible. But you also know that you're a literal genius who could probably do this. That's why you're confident in yourself and have to take other jobs. But secondly then, you are the most afraid of losing yourself. And this is probably going to be the most important analysis that comes in this round. Because you are forced to do this job that you literally think is the most morally harmful thing you can do just because you want money. You're never going to forgive yourself because you knew there was an alternative. And the reason you might not take this job is really simple. It's the fact that you have to do this every single day. It slowly erodes you. Perhaps you go to coping methods such as alcohol, become an alcoholic and waste all your money on that. Perhaps you are so far away from your family, you have no one to hold you accountable. Chonky is afraid of losing his own morals. And that is why absolutely he can never take this job. And eventually, it doesn't really matter as to whether or not Chonky like gets money or not, because ultimately you cannot trade the actual emotion of happiness for whatever amount of money, because you will be seen as a villain and your kids will hate you, everyone will hate you, we're proud of each other.
Okay, I'm also going to do a really quick thank you speech. I'll try to be quick because, yeah. Firstly, thank you to the CAs, to everyone on the Waterloo team for organizing a really great tournament. This is probably one of my last student tournaments because I'm a bit old. Also, thank you to my parents for guiding me through all the debate lessons they paid for. Thanks to all the friends I made in debate who unfortunately are not here because they're also a bit old. And most of all, thanks to my partner, Eric. This is actually our first tournament together, but yeah, it's been pretty fun so far. And yeah, just thankful for the opportunity to be here. I think opening opposition is right in pointing out that the mental toll of this decision is the biggest factor in this debate. So we didn't think that it was about whether or not you thought that you might have been more successful or you thought you might have earned more money. It was the fact that the end impact of not taking on that decision or taking on what we thought was the most important. Our extension is going to be on regret. I'm going to first make a few strategic comments about the round, then I'll go into the extension. First, just on commentary on the general round. So I think generally, the front half focuses a lot about the production of the weapons, whether or not it will be more or less ethical. We think that primarily ends up in a deadlock and washes out. Given that on both sides, I think it's agreed that there might be other people who are also doing the same thing. Either way, the weapons are still being developed. It's unclear why a month earlier it's not probably going to be that big of a difference. Okay, but we also think that opening government has been incredibly shallow in actually claiming the impacts of taking or not taking, because they just comment primarily, because the economy is bad and you want a job, obviously this is a good decision to make, or you just want to make your wife happy. We thought it was the regret of not taking on this decision, of what could have, that was the most debilitating, that caused you to suffer the worst kind of situation that your life could possibly be in after that. We tell you that your life after making this decision to not take a job on their side is going to make you very, very miserable. You're going to struggle to get out of bed. You're going to feel miserable when your kids feel like you failed them. You're going to not be able to look them in the eye every single day. When you hear their stomachs rumble, you're going to think to yourself that that was because of you. We think there are two ways in which this kind of regret enhances in a very harmful way. Firstly, just in terms of the potential money that you were able to earn. So we think on their side, you think and you perceive that you fumbled a massive amount of bag on their side. Because at that moment, you don't have any other opportunities. You don't know what other potential ways that you could gain money on that side would actually happen. So this means that even in our absolute worst case, in which perhaps there is some math job out there for you, the fact that you feel like there is nothing out there, the fact that you are so desperate and you look towards that as the only thing, makes you immensely wistful of the money that you could have earned. We think this is magnified by the fact that you have to face people you care about every single day. We think that even if your kids care to some extent about morals, even though it's a time where people are quite extreme and it's a wartime where these morals aren't as upheld as they currently are today, we think the fact that people care the most about their own well-being, that you care the most about not having to go to bed hungry and feel cold every single day, that was the biggest factor that we think caused this kind of regret. But I think secondly, just in terms of morality, and the premise here is that no matter the actual difference that whether or not it's you or whether or not it's Dr. T making these weapons is, so no matter if Dr. T is only a tad bit more unethical than you or just the same as you, we say that in either case, you as Chonky will always perceive that you could have been more ethical. And the idea here is that because you don't know anything else, because there's so much uncertainty, and because you know for a fact that person does not have any ethical restraints, you think that you would always have been able to be better, even if you never were going to be. Notice that this takes the worst case of opening government, because their argument contingents on those weapons being made by Dr. T actually being more unethical, or maybe other people on the team not being able to mitigate those kinds of things. We told you that in our worst case, in which perhaps there's no delta in the actual practical impact, the fact is that he perceives as being incredibly horrible because he feels like he could have done more. And the strategic implication here is we think that this guilt for your family is an added layer upon everything else. So even if every single practical mistake washes out about whether or not you can earn more money as a mathematician or as a person in this job, or whether or not you could have made stuff that was more ethical, we thought the fact that you perceive this to be a very nebulous decision and something that you ultimately took accountability for is very, very harmful. I think this is actually then how you actualize the opening government benefits, not benefits of setting your wife and stuff like that. Because it wasn't just the fact that maybe you didn't earn as much money, because we think that even in a case where you could perhaps get a job later down the line, maybe that wouldn't be so bad. But it's the fact that you think to yourself and you feel the guilt and the responsibility and the accountability for not being able to provide. We thought that the fact that your family probably cared about having full bellies over any kind of morality that opening opposition posits, we thought that was the most important part of this debate. Okay,
You realize that your extension is probably about money. If Dr. Chonky wanted money, then he would probably do whatever immoral things the government asks to speed up the project and get it over with.
Yeah, but the problem with that is that he's starving, right? The fact that you are starving and you feel like you had the potential to gain money, even if that wasn't the only opportunity, but it feels like that is the only opportunity, we think that is the most debilitating. The ultimate impact then is that independent of how much damage from weapons you can actually mitigate, or independent of how much money you make, you will always feel
so miserable, so debilitated by this choice because you look at the people around you, every single day you struggle to come to terms with the fact that you fumbled such a large amount of bag. Like this is like wait, never mind. That was a bad example. But we think the fact that even in the case in which it's not actually that big of a difference, we thought that our case is still able to stand. Touch the post.
CO is going to do two things to win this debate. Firstly, we're going to completely prove structurally why things will get better in the long term. Secondly, we're going to prove why this job will torment you so badly that no amount of money can buy you out of it. Firstly, on the framing then, why things will get better. 3 reasons. Firstly, you can just become a professor later down the line. Because I want to specify the reason as to why you're currently unemployed is because, despite having as many qualifications as possible, is because of a short-term cost. That is to say, during World War II, men are currently being conscripted, leading to less demand for education in university, because men are the ones who go to university and are the breadwinners of the family. Which then means that because men are out of university during the war, there's no demand for your knowledge. But therefore, we think that you won't be unemployed forever. Rather, when people return to university and when you're back in demand, you're able to get a job as a professor, for example. It was therefore you won't be completely unemployed, which takes down the CG premise, where in the long term you can just get another job. You won't feel like you fumbled the bag. Secondly, you can make adjustments to your budget, right? For example, downsizing to move into a cheaper house, so you can allocate funding to buy more groceries, for example, for your children, so you don't starve. Or just reducing your spending as a whole, maybe rationing food in the worst case. And insofar as you do have a budget as a preschool teacher, given that your spouse is a teacher, this is probably just possible in the first place. Thirdly, a recession to this extent will be the #1 priority for all governments internationally to cooperate and to resolve. Because we think that after the war, the economy will always trend toward recovery. So for example, if it is the case that you lower interest rates to get people spending again after they've saved up so much money for a rainy day, which we think that ultimately the world will trend towards recovery anyways. Well, our extension will prove why this job will torment you every single second of your fucking life. The first thing I want to do is make the distinction between the mental impact of you taking the job and letting someone else take it, because the opening government argument here is basically that, oh, well, if you let someone else take it, you feel morally responsible for them being an immoral actor. Honors to the house, you believe that you can pass up the opportunity and move on in the long term. Because no, 1942 is before Hiroshima occurred. It happened in 1945, so you don't know that this is going to happen. Therefore, the more likely framing of your current knowledge in your current state is that we think that nuclear weapons are very unlikely to be used because of mutually assured destruction. This is because if you attack someone with nuclear bombs, you will get bombed back, which therefore the intuitive result is just a stalemate where no one has an incentive to take action because of such a potentially large consequence can happen in retaliation. Therefore, at this point in time, we are under the impression that we can just pass up the offer and move on with our lives, where in the long term, we probably won't see bombs used anyways. Therefore, the guilt that you do face on ours, the house, is only in the short term, where in the slice of time that you do pass up the offer, but in the long term, you're able to eventually forget. You're under the impression in this point of slice of time that you're able to let it go. On the other hand, you cannot forget because you work the fucking job, right? You feel that you're actively going against your very deeply held beliefs and your moral impetus. You're the one making a potential contribution to the potential death of thousands, if not millions of people, even if you don't actually kill anyone. Which guilt is more proximate to you as a result in the long term. Therefore, it is exclusively on their side of the house that you feel like you have that they feel guilt in the long term because you have to make an active contribution daily and work against your moral impetus. Note, this reasoning of guilt or proving guilt is not contingent on whether or not you actually kill people. Insofar as you believe this is wrong and you actually actively go against your morals, this is just guilt. It causes guilt anyways. The second part of the extension is just giving you a laundry list of reasons why this will torment you in your daily life. Firstly, you have to constantly lie to the people around you. Where A, you lie to your child because you have an incentive to be a good role model as a parent, right? Because oftentimes you know that children look up to their parents unconditionally. You view them as superheroes and very morally righteous, and that they're right no matter what. So when your child asks you, Daddy, what do you work as your job? What do I want to become in the future? Or what was your job? You have to constantly lie to them. You have to say, I was a businessman. You have to say, I went on like a plane trip to somewhere to do some investigation. You also have to constantly make sure they don't find out in the future, which is another burden that you carry on. But secondly, why do you lie to other people? It's because even if other people don't really care, your moral impetus inherently shapes how you want other people to perceive you. So for example, even if vaping is cool currently, if it is the case that you do hate vaping and that you don't want, this then means that you don't want people to know that you vape because you perceive it as a stain on your reputation. You have internalized stigma. This means that you have an incentive to tell these same lies that you tell to your child to other people, which makes every single social interaction where you talk about your daily life hell, right? So it makes you constantly fear that you can't split up, which leads to more guilt. Secondly, on geographic segregation, because bases for nuclear development are often located in very isolated deserts in like the middle of America, right? And this is very top secret. Therefore, you literally can't see your family for years, in which therefore you spiral into insanity because you can't hug your child every day or laugh with them or laugh with your family. But this also just makes it harder to lie. You have to say that you're on a business trip in which you have to justify some way to justify the fact that you're moving out and leaving your family in the first place. And the end impact here is very simple. We've proven accumulation of mental harm. You'll fucking hate your life. Nothing will matter anymore after, which therefore, on our house, you're able to actually be with your family geographically, and on our house, things will get better. We're able to prove things in the long term.
Alright, quick thank you speech, I guess. Thank you to my parents who are funding all of my debate ventures. Thank you to the CA team for organizing this tournament. Thank you to all the debaters here for fun competition and also great ideas. Thank you to my partner Ria for partnering with me and making the experience quite enjoyable and fun. Speech begins in 3, 2, 1. Open government space is susceptible because all the mechanisms and all the impacts are dependent on if like people are actually killed. If the bomb actually drops, if they see the end impact of their like invention killing multiple like masses of people, that's when regret starts to kick in. We told you that regret kicked in the moment you didn't accept the job. We told you that regret kicked in the moment when you said, no, I'm gonna let this Tairanosaurs do the thing and like do everything and like make things a lot worse. That's what we told you on closing government. That's why our extension is different and our extension is unique. Okay, first then just even going further into our extension, right? We have told you that the regret of what could have happened is very harmful for a multitude of reasons. The first like main reason is that like the idea that you yourself could have limited like the catastrophe that could have happened. So the idea that you now have to live with like this idea that you could have prevented harm every single day. The fact that you have to tell your kids that, oh no, I could have solved something, but then I let this other professor or doctor do it instead, and it resulted in a lot more harms. So we told you that first of all, you could have been more ethical. The idea that you could have held to your standards by mitigating the impact of this was something that was very, very detrimental to you. But I think secondly, it's just like this idea of like fumbling like your career. So I think insofar as like this person or like Chonky is like very well educated. Like he probably had lots of like university education to get to this point. He probably went through lots of years and years of hard work and study. So the regret of not being able to use that skill, not being able to use those skills to actively combat, like this other person who would have made things a whole lot worse. The fact that he could have used his analytical skills, his like degree in physics, his like all those years of memorizing like Newton's laws, his ability to just understand how the world works. He could have used those skills to make things a lot better and sort of mitigate and develop the nuclear weapon in a way that was a lot more manageable. That regret is something that's going to happen to him, and we thought it was really, really bad. Later, on to then the impacts. I think the impacts of this regret are a couple-fold. Firstly, the only thing we hear from opening government is the fact that the regret is going to manifest like on himself, right? So he's going to like feel really sad, he's going to feel like really bad about what he could have done. But I think this has like secondary implications. So what this means is that because he's so regretful, it likely seeps into other aspects of his life. It seeps into his relationships, right? Because every day he's thinking about what could have happened, because every day he's consumed by the fact that there was something more that he had done. It means his relationships with his family probably deteriorate. It means his relationship with his wife probably deteriorates. So even though, so this means that like it probably is really bad for him, and it's probably also really bad for like the development of his family as a whole. Okay, on to what we hear from closing opposition then. Closing opposition gives us this idea that number one, they can just like pass on this opportunity and like go for the long term. And I think the response is just that like you cannot forget because you were actively offered a role in this, right? Someone came up to you and offered you a role. So the fact that you neglected it and the fact that you didn't care about it, the fact that you like rejected it, meant that you were an active role in like you played an active role in allowing someone who was far worse, someone who handled the situation far worse to like handle the situation. That was the regret that manifested. But the second case is on like how it's going to torment you. And here they talk about like you can like lie to your children. First of all, why the hell can he not just tell his children that he's a scientist? I don't think he's lying. I think he's still able to maintain some of his like moral and ethical values, like telling the truth. I think he's still able to say that he was a scientist because at the end of the day, he is trying to mitigate the harm that otherwise would have happened on the counterfactual, right? When the counterfactual ends up happening, it's how the Tyrannosaurus guy makes things even worse. Okay, quickly then onto open opposition. I think open opposition has a couple of points. The first is this idea of like mental toll. So people around him dislike him. I'm not sure like I'm not sure how like much this is true, considering the fact that like people probably understand like the situation at hand, right? People are able to recognize that first, like people are able to recognize that like the situation is very serious, and given the fact that he does have the most talent, given the fact that he is the most qualified, he's probably the one best fit for the job. So they're probably going to be more supportive of him rather because they feel like, oh, because he is the one that's most fit, he might as well do it. He might as well do this. Chonky.
The opportunity cost of money doesn't matter as much when every single day your government is forcing you to do things that are morally apprehensible to you. No amount of money or
Wait,
opportunity
see my
cost.
previous analysis. The idea is that even though you are doing something that's more morally apprehensible, the idea is that you are limiting something that could have been even more morally apprehensible to you. So the idea of letting someone else do it in a far worse manner than what you could have done is the regret that we're saying happens on our side, on your side of the house. Okay, but then we also hear this case about like how he's able to like he cares, like his family cares more about like his value or like his values than money. I'm not sure how like his family cares more about the money than his values, or yeah, or cares more about the money than his values. I'm not sure how much this is true, considering the fact that like his family probably wants him to make the best moral choice. And so given the fact that his family probably knows about Tairanosaur, probably knows the fact that she's gonna like go crazy and nuke the world and destroy the world because like the expansion is so like unregulated, the fact that this is probably gonna happen, his family probably is able to sympathize and be like, okay, daddy, you should like do this and like, you know, just do it in a better way. Do it in a better way that's not so destructive for the world. For all those reasons, super proud to stand on side with them. Thank you.
I'm going to structure this speech through pointing out the problems of every single team. First on opening opposition's lack of charitable response, opening government's bullshit, and closing government should be self-explanatory. First on opening opposition's lack of charitable response. Opening government's positive material is that you're going to be stuck in economic destitution, and that's something that closing government is mostly derivative of. Opening opposition attempts to respond by saying, there are alternatives, you can be a math professor. But if that were the case, why wouldn't you just become a math professor? Because clearly there aren't any alternatives, right? We then give you 5 responses in Anderson's speech in order to break this deadlock to mitigate the vast majority of the economic destitution claim from opening government. What were these responses? Firstly, it's unclear as to why you can't subsist in one job insofar as this was the 1940s. Like, just gut check this, right? In the 1950s, literally, men were able to subsist and make a living for their entire family, buy a house on one job, being a steel worker, for example. This isn't in the 1980s, after Reaganomics, that made it so that taxes were so low to the point where you had to borrow a lot of money that caused a lot of inflation in the very first place. And most likely, you had a house because you were a professor, you had kids, which means that the only economic burden is to buy things like groceries, is to pay things like the electricity bill. And even though your wife has a modest salary, that is probably sufficient for all those utilities. But secondly, they say that the recession is worsening. This is just untrue, right? Because this is after the establishment of the New Deal by FDR, which has been empirically shown in history to improve the economy. But thirdly, like it's unclear as to why, actually, wait, never mind. Second response then, on jobs. Anderson told you that you can be a professor in 3 years. We have no response to this, which means that in 3 years, you're likely to be able to get a job. And that meant that the economic destitution was likely to be short term. But secondly, because there was going to be an economic boom after 3 years, after World War II. Firstly, because of the fact that the USD was going to be an international reserve currency, which led to an economic boom, which is why the generation of this era were called the baby boomers, because of the economic boom that happened, which led to the influx of substantial amount of new jobs. Which means that, sure, it's only 3 years, but that's far better than the long, lingering, eternal harm of being morally guilty on their side of the house. I'll take opening.
When Chonky rejects this job but finds out about the secret US progress, will he be killed by the US?
No. Okay, on opening government. Before that, I just want to raise this point. So, they say that, so even in the worst case in which this job is insufficient towards supporting your family, what were the deadlock rates? Firstly, obviously you're able to downsize. It's unclear as why these utilities are going to be that expensive. You can buy less groceries, for example. Secondly, because it's 3 years versus your life forever. But thirdly, note that OO loses this OG critique. Because if you're in genuine economic destitution, if you're starving, that is a far bigger and more certain harm of you just feeling like you're morally responsible for a lot of death. No, thank you. Which means that the biggest burden of opening opposition, the burden that you ought to credit the highest, which only Anderson proved,
was that you were able to stay economically sufficient as opposed to the moral guilt. But Anderson also had some unique mechanisms as to why moral guilt would be exclusive under our side, that it would happen on our side, which is why he wins on both of those clashes, which is why we beat opening opposition. On opening government, it's bullshit then. No thank you. So their first claim is that you can limit the harms of bombs. But Oppenheimer was also against the bombs, but they were still dropped, and that was for two structural reasons. Firstly, because it was determined by the legislative branch and the executive branch, which is why when Douglas MacArthur wanted to drop the bomb on China, he was deterred by, what was his name, Harry Truman, because of the fact that that was the person who had the capability to choose whether or not to drop the bomb. But secondly, it's developed by, for example, 50 more physicists because there was intense political pressure on getting the bomb released as soon as possible because you needed to compete with Germany, which means that, sure, maybe maybe Tyrannosaurus gets the job, but it's unclear as to why there aren't going to be 40 other Tyrannosauruses who limited your ability to influence the guidelines to which the bomb would be produced, which means that, and notably, these are the people who are likely to self-select into the job in the first place, which is why you're probably unable to make any moral guidelines, which is why you can't prevent harm on their side of the house. That was their secondary impact. We think that opening government is false. On closing government, they say that you're going to feel regret, but obviously in 3 years you're probably going to have a job. Obviously you're still going to be economically subsistent. So we just framed their impact out of this debate. On opening opposition, firstly, they just jumped right to the why of guilt, but we actually proved the X of why you're going to feel guilt every day. Firstly, because their impact was contingent on you actually killing people, but we aren't relying on that because it was violating your moral framework of creating the weapon and your role in the potential of leading to mass death, which means that we prove a more guaranteed impact on them. For all those reasons, opposed.